Hello and welcome to 2024 with the Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. We have so much in store for you. This year, we're well into season 4, and I'm thrilled that you're with us. First, I want to give a giant shout out and thank you, heartfelt thanks to all the patrons who are the lifeblood of this podcast and who absolutely make it possible. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. We have lots of fun in store for patrons this year, some new contests, some wonderful prizes, some special content from our fabulous guests. And so if you want to be a patron, please reach out and we'll get you set up. You can join the patron family. So ahead in 2024, some special surprises. Starting next month in February, we are going to publish a few. We have one underway, ebooks that will be free for the asking. Our first one is published during February in the US. That is the month of Valentine's Day. So the focus will be on romance and love. Now, I know that'll be easy for the romantics, but there are some pretty love-driven royals and rebels as well. So we'll have the top 10 royals, rebels, and romantics, and I'd love to hear from you. Who should be among that crowd? I also want to mention we'll be having some tea and talk sessions coming up starting in the spring, where we'll arrange some places that we can meet in person. We're going to start in the DC area because that's where I am. But as I travel, I'll be able to do some meetups as well. We'll go to tea and talk about some of your favorite royals, rebels, and romantics. So stay tuned for more information on that. Now, exciting news. The Tudors by Numbers, which is above me on both sides, is now available on my website. You can reach out to me and I can send you a signed copy dedicated to you or anyone you like. It's not just for Christmas. It's a wonderful gift anytime, especially for you. Now, finally, I do want to thank you so much for listening and watching on YouTube, if that's how you're experiencing us. Please, please leave us a rating if you would after you listen. It really helps other people find us. So if you would please rate and reach out. I would love to hear from you, what you're enjoying, what you would like to hear and see more of, and how you would like to get involved as we keep shaking up history together. Now, another wonderful episode is coming up. Welcome, everyone. I am delighted to be here with my friend, Brigitte Webster, who is the expert on Tudor food and who has just published her wonderful book, which you can see above me, Eating with the Tudors. You know that I love this book, and I'm so excited to have Brigita here to share it with you. So thank you very much, Brigita, for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. To me, it's always doubly exciting to be able to chat to a friend, not just a Tudor history friend, but a real friend from real life. That makes it double special. So I am absolutely excited to be here and talk Tudor food with you.
Yes, well, Brigita and I have been friends we started as Tudor friends and now we're friends, as she said, and we had our books released the very same day. So we're also book friends. So, but I want to start with your journey, Brigita, to becoming the Tudor food expert. So tell us about how you came to be the go-to person on Tudor food.
How long have you got? Well, I'll try and cut it short because it's been quite an amazing journey, really. But it started back in the 70s, 80s. I was educated in Austria, And there, then, girls were still very much considered, being responsible for the house, the children, being a good housewife. So you were educated not just in the normal academic subjects, but also cookery and sewing and embroidery and looking after children and the elderly. You name it, the list is endless. And so at the time, I didn't realize it, obviously. Actually, like all teenagers, I thought, oh, why do I have to learn all this? I'll never need that ever. But I'm not a quitter. I did it and I did well. And in 1989, after I had qualified to become a teacher for home economics and history, I joined my husband then here in England. I mean, he obviously is English, but he attracted my attention out on the continent, and I joined him. And I started to teach here. But sadly, there was always a shortage of German teachers. So they made me teach German for 25 years. And I was never allowed to do any cookery or history. So when I turned 50, I decided that's it. I want to do history now. I have done enough German. So I started in my free time to join online courses about the history of food. And it was there that I met an American lady, actually. And she, later I found out, is a bit of an expert on food history. And she noticed, or she must have noticed, hopefully, that I stood out a little bit from all the other people. And she took me under her wing, and yeah, that's how it started. So from there on, I dedicated quite a lot of time on researching 16th century recipes, recreating them, and yeah, it really gave me a buzz. That was a sensational feeling. I was doing science, history, cookery, everything in one go. And then I met you in
Yes.
2017 on a trip, on a
Mhm.
Tudor trip. We both had signed up. And we met Susanna Lipscomb, didn't we?
That's right.
And she was the first one who listened to what I was doing, and she thought, "Wow, this is something you really have to do something with. Don't do it in the cupboard at home. Come out, do it." So slowly, yes, I started, but then COVID came,
Mhm.
and like for everybody else, it put a stop to so many plans and things. Um, but it was then that Pen and Sword noticed my regular postings about dishes I reproduced and the research I did. And they said, "Hey, would you like to write a book?" And the rest is history.
Right. Well, I was lucky enough in that tour we both did. I was simply a participant, but Susanna Lipscomb did notice something special about Brigita. And so when we were in the kitchens of Hampton Court Palace, she had Brigita do a presentation about Tudor food, and it was wonderful. And I was so excited. I learned so much. The whole tour was wonderful. We learned so much. But I was so excited to see this specialty. And then our paths crossed several more times. So Brigita and I were
Yeah.
able to continue to share. And I
Oh,
I can tell you, I have visited and I have been fortunate enough to eat some of the Tudor food she produces, and it is wonderful. So one of the things I think is interesting is in some of the popular movies or shows about Henry VIII, we see him grabbing a turkey leg and just chomping it down and throwing it over his shoulder, the bones over his shoulder, and we see him just as sort of gorging on everything. And that's not really what Tudor eating is all about. It really has sort of skewed the idea of Tudor eating. So can you tell us a little bit what a balanced meal meant to the Tudors? And Henry, at least early on, was actually very healthy. We forget that because he turned into such a gigantic person, but early on he was actually healthy and ate very well. So what would a balanced meal have been like for the Tudors?
Right. Now, food was extremely important to the Tudors. I would say much more than it does today. So it was very important that it was, you did have to get it right what you ate in front of other people. You were having to send out a message. What you ate was what you were. So
Mm.
very important. Um, what a healthy, balanced meal meant is quite different. The Tudors definitely had the concept of a healthy, balanced meal. Definitely. But how they went about it was a little bit bizarre in our ways, and it changed also. So during Henry VIII, a healthy diet depended very much on your gender, your age, your class, the seasons, and also climate conditions. So
Mm.
if you lived in England, you would have different requirements to somebody living in sunny, warm Italy. And all the guidelines were based on Galen, who was an ancient Greek physician active in ancient Rome. So you see, they took the information from hundreds of years previously. And Galen's rules of a healthy body and a healthy diet were based on four humours, which were believed to make up our body. And those four humours had to be balanced. And if they got out of sync, it was a sign that you were ill. So, food too had been allocated qualitative qualitative properties, just like the humours. And they were cold, wet, hot, and dry. And every food item was chosen on those merits to balance the patient's or the person's humoral makeup. Um, Now, those properties could also be, those food properties could be tampered with, they could be improved, they could be changed if needed to by adding spices or condiments. Choosing the right means of cooking did the same. Like boiling was considered wet cooking and roasting dry cooking. So basically, food in early Tudor England was a corrective and an equalizer. And it was your physician who would tell you what your humours were based on Galen's theory. And your right food intake would help you to keep those humours then nicely balanced, um, and the body healthy. Now, in early Tudor England, it was the attitude that your body was healthy unless you showed symptoms. And a healthy body asked for myriad humours. So if, like me, now I'm a woman, and surprise, surprise, I would have been regarded as hot. Yeah, of course. And because I am past childbearing age, I was considered old, which made me dry. So you have this hot and dry female body who, in early Tudor England, would have required hot and dry food to stay healthy because I am healthy. So I would have been asked eat the same, that reflects, that mirrors that, and you'll be fine. So, to give you an example, that would have meant roast chicken, spices, sugar, and surprisingly, wine. Now, we might think, but wine is wet. Well, not in Tudor England. Wine was considered to be dry.
Hmm.
And we still have this little leftover English humoral system in that we sometimes refer to wine that's not very sweet as dry.
Oh, that's
There
interesting.
is, yeah, there is absolutely no explanation why we would do that because, dry doesn't mean not very sweet wine. It just means dry. That comes from those humoral systems. So, anyway, I was a happy lady. I had my roast chicken, I had my sugar, I had my wine. I was happy. Um, and yeah, but it changed. Under Elizabeth, we see certain trends change. We are starting to enter a new phase where even physicians start asking questions. And with the arrival of new food from the Americas, all of a sudden those physicians thought, oh, heck, what qualitative properties do they have? Potato, or aubergine, or tomato, or turkey. What are they? Because Galen didn't have them. So they started to think and were slowly moving away. They also had started to observe that often it was the laboring class that appeared to be way healthier than the aristocracy that only ate meat and wine and basically what I had. And so it started to slowly change, not overnight, but towards the end of the 16th century, we definitely see salads, fruit, fresh fruit, tarts, more fish, and boiled chicken arrive at the table. And also, for the first time ever, were you encouraged to see your body as constantly sick, in need of treatment? And that completely reversed what you were told to eat. So now, all of a sudden, I mean, my qualitative humors have not changed. I'm still the dry and hot female, but now I'm encouraged to eat more wet and uh, cold food to balance it out because now my body is in need of treatment constantly. If I stop that, I'll become ill. And that is a major thing. So many people don't know about it, but it explains why you see a change in recipes, why all of a sudden you see a lot more vegetables coming in all the recipe books, which you didn't have before. Um, and yes, so for the Tudors, nourishment, which for them meant sustaining foods, and they referred to that to gross. So when you read a Tudor text that refers to gross food, they do not mean disgusting, they mean very sustaining food suitable for hard laboring folk. And I am always amazed how, in many ways, how modern their approach is. For instance, if you think the Tudors recommended that you left at least 4 hours fasting in between the meals. we do the same.
Mhm.
All those losing weight fads now, intermediate fasting,
Mm,
same thing. Um, they didn't quite understand. They were not aware of the calories, but they understood that the body needed time to digest food. And if you ate something very rich, it took longer for the body to digest it. And that is mostly why the aristocracy and the nobility only had two meals a day, because they got up very late. So they only needed a meal in the late morning and again in the early evening. There was no need to have any more. And also because they stuffed themselves in those two sittings. Um, yeah, so I find it really fascinating. And only in the 16th century do you see this vast change, not before and not after. It's the 16th century in England where these huge changes do take place, and where also the all important spices started to be replaced with herbs. Uh,
Can you tell us a little more about that? Because as the spices, they were starting to come in from the exploration over the 16th century, right? So they're finding things in new
yeah,
areas of the world.
the spices were actually something very medieval.
Mm.
Um, if you look into medieval cookery, you will be amazed just how much spices appear in every single dish. That would be cinnamon, mace, ginger, and anise, cloves, a lot more than we do today, and saffron. Because spices were very expensive. You had to have them imported. So it was definitely a sign of your standing in society. You've made it if you could order spices. And you often hear this myth that the Tudors used spices to cover up the taste of rotten meat. Ah, I am afraid this is the biggest con ever. And it nobody knows who first coined it, but evidence points at the Victorians. They didn't quite understand what was going on. They were very much interested in history, but they lacked the degree, the depth of research. So they just made it up. What is true is that the spices were used in food to help the body not age. So it was a preservative, yes, and it was for meat, but it was the human flesh.
Oh.
It was meant to retain your youthful looks and that way keep you healthy. And I think it's just astounding, isn't it? But by Elizabethan times, they again started to think, yeah, well, it doesn't really work that well, does it? Uh, and they started to observe other people who appeared healthy, which was the laboring class, eating mostly vegetables and herbs. Herbs were actually used for vegetables. You don't really see the word vegetables a lot. It's always herbs. And they found that, yeah, actually it tastes quite nice. And yeah, you can actually serve that to the wealthy as well. And yeah, it seems to have an effect. And yeah, so this is how we started to introduce more vegetables and herbs.
Oh, that's
Um,
great. So I know you've mentioned, I love all this. I know you've mentioned the senses that are involved in Tudor food. So you're not just tasting, but you're also smelling and seeing. Tell us a little bit about that. How do you appeal, or how did, and I know not all levels of society, but in the aristocracy, how did the food appeal to all the senses?
It was very important that food A looked good. I mean,
Hmm.
we do eat with our eyes, we still do. That it smelled delicious, and also that it tasted. Now, taste, as we know, varies. Uh, but the color in early Tudor England, the favorite food color was yellow to reflect gold, and gold was the best. So saffron was your best friend. And you find that a lot of recipe use saffron not for taste but as a colorant. Later on, you see a lot more colorants from vegetable dyes like beet or spinach. But then again, spinach only arrived in England in the 16th century. We always take it for granted that all the vegetables were around and available. But no, 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 it was extremely seasonal. Um, and food obviously had to smell very nice, delicious. Onion and garlic were not considered to be nice. And you find garlic and onion in only a handful of English recipes. You do find them in Italian recipes, so the Italians got it right. They thought, well, it's got to taste good, but the English don't. And every time I come across a recipe that actually uses garlic, I highlight it because it's so rare. No, they used more spices like cinnamon and nutmeg to make their food more fragrant. Um, yeah,
That's really interesting, and I really am fascinated by the saffron more for the color. We think of it for taste now, but they were
yeah, no,
using it more for the color, which is that's just really interesting. I had not really
yeah,
associated that
yeah.
that way. That's really interesting.
In Spain and Italy, you obviously had turmeric
Mhm.
through the Arab culture, but England was always very slow to take on anything that came from the rest of Europe. So we are generally hundreds of years behind. The only thing we seem to have adopted very quickly was the orange. The orange does appear right from the start in, yeah, and even in the time of Henry VII, very rare and obviously totally expensive, but it does appear. Then in the early 1500s, you have Turkey
Mhm.
from the Americas via the Spaniards, but they are being mentioned to start being traded at London markets. And then we have the guinea pig. Now, the guinea pig, the Tudors mixed up with the turkey. And it's actually, this is where I love doing my research, trying to find out where did it go all wrong. Who was the first to do that mix up? And the Tudors didn't quite understand where the turkey came from, and they didn't realize that the guinea pig, the guinea fowl,
Guinea fowl, yeah.
God, there you go. See, I am the one now. People will quote me in 200 years' time. Now, the guinea fowl came from Africa, but the Tudors labeled everything that came from abroad coming through Turkey. And they didn't understand that the bird, the turkey, didn't come via
Oh.
Turkey. So they labeled that the turkey, and the guinea fowl, or guinea cock, as they refer to it, came roughly at the same time, but clearly, really through Turkey. But then that name was already taken. So you see, either the guinea fowl also labeled as turkey or as guinea cock. And the first one to mention that was in 1577, Barnaby Gooch. We did a
Oh.
translation on a book on husbandry by a German, which I'm not going to bore you with. But yes, I discovered that the other day and I was very, very excited. I thought, now at last, I know the first time somebody actually mentioned guinea fowl.
Oh, that's great. And you can see the confusion because the term
Yeah,
turkey is already taken because they got that
yeah,
part wrong. So, yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
so things get
All they
misnamed. Yeah.
knew, yeah, they obviously knew that they didn't look like chickens, that the guinea fowl was that much smaller. Somehow I was lost on them. But anyway, it's fascinating to track down where people started to miscommunicate and mislabel things. And that is a very common problem in Tudor England for plants, flowers, and, many things, the wrong labeling, and then you have to go back and pick out the truth and what's what. And yeah, it's fun.
Well, it is interesting because as all of these new things were coming in and new ideas, and people were all calling them something different. So it does get really
Yeah,
confusing. So thank you and
yeah,
your expertise for picking it out. So I'm imagining, and I know things changed, the Reformation changed things, the times changed, assumptions changed. So let's just pick two of the Tudors that we know really love to show off. Henry VIII and Elizabeth I. They did everything big and grand. So, what might have been served, and are there differences or are they the same? So, imagine a Christmas court during the time, or a big feast of some kind during the time of Henry VIII or the time of Elizabeth. What might they have included to show off their magnificence and their royalty and their wealth? Because, like you said, food was a way of communicating. We don't necessarily think of it that way today, but it was a big way of communicating to their people and to ambassadors and visitors from other kingdoms. So, what might the food have looked like at a really grand royal feast for those two sort of show offy monarchs?
well, for Henry, all the feasts and the menus I've seen are definitely meat heavy. um What's interesting is that every course comprises a number of different dishes, and those dishes can be sweet and savory. It's like you get three whole courses of everything. Soup, which was not known as pottage. So pottage features everywhere. Pottage was the dish that everybody had, whether they were working class or nobility or royalty. Everybody had pottage. What went into the pottage made the difference. So Henry would just have had meat pottage and uh, spiced with lots of spices, but that's it. Where obviously further down you get less and less. You would find a selection of different meat pies, very much a feast feature. Again, all sorts of different meat. It was the diversity that mattered. You had to show that you could offer every meat, and your guest could pick and choose what they fancied. So it was like a buffet. One course after the other was just a buffet. You weren't really supposed to eat everything until you were stuffed. It was more like picking and choosing, and yeah. Um, and what's interesting is that a Henrican feast would then finish with hippocras, the spiced wine, and wafers. Those are very, very thin baked biscuits as such, and sometimes they were served with comfits, which are sugar coated seeds. And in Henry's time, that marked the end of your feast. So when that was served, you knew, right, I have to ask for my horse to be brought to the front door. It's time to go home. In Elizabethan England, that's where it starts to change. And it changes beyond recognition because it was the Elizabethan that have sort of introduced the banquet. And in England, only was a banquet a dessert course. So the Tudors would not have called a banquet a feast or a feast a banquet. These were completely different. The feast, you had to sit down according to where your status in society told you to. The banquet was very informal. You had to be specially invited. Not everybody was automatically on the list. You had to be a bit of the in crowd to be invited. And then these people were taken somewhere else. In the beginning, uh, somewhere else in the house. That could have been up on the rooftop in a little chamber in one of the towers. But the banqueting house extravaganza took off in a big way, and people started to build specific banqueting houses in their gardens. And so you see where the gardening comes in. You can't keep the two apart. And because out there you no longer have access to serving staff, you have to have food that people could pick up themselves, food that doesn't need to be hot but cold. And this is where we get banqueting food. And banqueting food is generally very expensive to make. It's mostly made from sugar, very expensive, had to be imported. And also, you had to employ a new profession specialist because obviously nobody had made banqueting food before. So the confectioner arrives. And it's fascinating going through Elizabeth accounts and household accounts in particular, where we start to see the word confection. And that meant somebody who only made sugary products for the banquet. And it started to be a real art. And it's fascinating to read about what they produced, whole miniature buildings made out of sugar work. And those sugarwork objects were there to tell your guests something. So there, there was
Mhm.
always a hidden meaning everywhere. One of the first banquets we actually witness, even at Henry VIII time, the field of gold of cloth, where he entertains the French queen, and the French queen entertains Henry. And Catherine has got laid on the table all the French royal animals, like the salamander laid out in sugar work. It was a way to show your guest how much you value them, how important they are. So all of those sugar work pieces of art weren't just there to entertain, but they also were a messenger, and you had to get it right.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, and the whole idea of having a separate course that's just for this, even more showing off, and the idea of a separate building. And so we'll just throw in a plug because Brigita and I are both participating in something later this year, Tudor Con at Agecroft Hall in Virginia, where there is a separate banqueting house. So there is the main house, and then you can see the smaller banqueting house. And so if you were on the list after the main feast was over, you would literally walk to the banqueting house, right?
Mhm.
And there would be another spectacular display. So now you know you really matter, right? Because you've been invited, you're in the special group in the in crowd, and
Yeah.
there would be some of these sugar creations. So, speaking of these sugar creations, because they were also sometimes given as gifts to the queen. Elizabeth loved her sugar. And so if you were wanting to really sort of show off your skills. So can you tell us about one of my favorite things is the chessboard that was made and out of sugar. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, the chessboard was made out of marchpane,
Right.
which was an early form of marzipan, but it's a little bit more solid because they baked it. Well, they had to, otherwise the chessboard probably would, yeah, go moldy quickly. And yes, that appears on several occasions. It seems to have been something that Elizabeth took a delight in because her chef uh, does seem to give it to her on frequent New Year's gift giving
Mhm.
events. But later on, towards the end of her career as a queen, we see something else coming up, and that takes over, and that's marmalade.
Mm.
Now, we think when we read marmalade, well, marmalade, that's the stuff we spread on our toast in the morning. In Tudor England, it was actually more like fruit leather. So you can pick it up with your hands. And if you do it right, it should not be sticky. It should be dry enough to pick up with your hands. And when you bite into it, it should fill you with just all sorts of delight, and you should be able to pick out the fruit it was made from. Now, the early marmalades were all made from quince. Quince was the standard fruit to be used, but quince is very seasonal. And in England, you only get quince. Depends on the year and how hot it got. But in the early autumn, you don't get it outside that time period. It just doesn't grow. Um, so yes, the royal kitchens probably could buy up all the quinces in the area and preserve them into marmalade for the queen, to sate her appetite all throughout the year. But they had to find something else. And that's when they started to use orange. So, only in the last few years of the 16th century do you actually get recipes that use orange for marmalade. Same concept, pick it up with your hand, it's like a fruit ladder, but then we seem to see the difference. The oranges having to be imported seem to be more of a status symbol than the quince ones. But yeah, interesting anyway. I think so.
It is. It's interesting to think about how things change and how different items become the sort of the hot thing to have or the special thing. So I want to now grab your book in case anyone hasn't seen it over my head. Hold it this way. Here we go. One of the things you do in this marvelous book is take us through the seasons. And so we're starting a new year. But I thought this would be a great time to have everybody start cooking. I know this starts in the spring, but it's starting to be a little light. We're starting to think about spring at least. Can you sort of take us through the seasons of the Tudor year with some of the items that might be especially enjoyed during the different seasons to get us excited about cooking
Right.
through the year? Mhm.
Yeah. I actually like that aspect of Tudor cooking very, very much. And I am delighted to see that there's a tendency to bring that back, that more and more celebrity chefs do seem to encourage people to buy local, to buy
Mhm.
seasonal, because it's not just cheaper, it's also, it tastes better. And, why not? Anyway, so we start off with spring. Now, spring traditionally was the harshest time. People don't believe that. People always assume it was winter, but in the winter they still had all the preserves and
Mm.
all the food that they managed to preserve in different ways from the autumn. But by the early spring, stock is running out. So people are starting to look what nature produces. Um, they are having to rely on what there still is in the vegetable garden, and that would be normally any root vegetables that remained in the ground
Mhm.
and actually produced sugar, like the parsnip. They deliberately enjoyed parsnip in the spring because it would have been subject to frost, which increased the sugar content. So anybody who couldn't afford honey or sugar, parsnip was your friend. But they also had other root vegetables, turnip is and carrots, and obviously you do have the leek as well. But leek, funny enough, started to fall out of fashion. I don't know why, but you don't get many recipes or posh recipes using leek. It was such a standard vegetable early on, but Tudors weren't too keen. Anyway, so it was harsh. And then you also have to cope with Lent, where you're not even allowed to eat any meat, no eggs, no milk, no cream, nothing. So what do you eat? Well, you eat vegetables, you eat grains, and you put them both into a pottage. Whether that was enjoyed, I don't know. Because you can read numerous accounts of people describing stockfish pottage. Now, stockfish is a salted, dried fish, hard as rock. And you had to have a stockfish hammer
Oh.
to actually slam it into edible pieces. And you had to soak it in water 2 days before you were going to use it because it was so salty. So I do question your term, whether they enjoyed it. That's what they ate, but whether they enjoyed it is a different question. Um, but just before Lent, you had pancakes and you also had fritters, and fish. And fish could be nice if you had money.
Mm.
If you had money, you would buy fresh fish, and we all enjoy a fresh fish, or most of us do. And so did the Tudors. It was just, down the ladder, it wasn't so much a privilege. You also get later on in spring, you get cheese. And for cheese, we need to slaughter veal because to make cheese, you need rennet, which is an enzyme that's only produced in a calf's stomach. So you see a lot of veal and lamb being eaten in the later spring. Summer, I think the Tudors definitely enjoyed summer eating. Lots of fresh berries, like strawberries. Um, you have cherries. They probably did eat raspberries as well, but funny enough, not a single recipe mentions them. We don't have any pictures. of people eating raspberries either. So yeah, it's one of my bugbears. I want to find out why that is, because we know they did have raspberries, but why they don't feature, I will solve it one day. But you then obviously have, especially in Elizabethan times, lots of fresh salad, vegetables. And I spent the summer 2 years ago making every single salad recipe I could get my hands on. And they are actually surprisingly refreshing and nice. Autumn, we go on into the quince and medlar time, apples and wardens, but it's also the season where all sorts of game meat feature. You see, chickens you see all the year round, and chickens were kept by almost all people, even in town. Everybody had chickens because you could get the eggs and you could get the meat when they stopped laying eggs. So very, very important. But the autumn sees a lot of game meat come to the market, except for venison. Venison you couldn't buy. You had to have your own deer park, which was called a forest, or you had to know somebody who could gift you venison. And a lot of letters from the Tudor times include gifted venison from one influential person to another. And we know that Cromwell was the recipient of many. You can see they were buying their favors there. And obviously, autumn is also the time where they need to get ready for winter. So there is a lot of animals being slaughtered. If they couldn't feed them through the winter, they slaughtered them and then preserved the meat either by putting it into brine or packing it into salt containers. So there were several ways, or even dried like sausages. But yeah, that was the time around St. Michael's where a lot of animals got slaughtered. Also big birds like geese and duck. And then we go into the winter. And the winter wasn't as harsh as we think, because they kept their best food for Christmas. Whether you were poor or rich, you made sure you had the very best for Christmas. So you have a bit of a highlight around Christmas. Before Christmas, you have Advent, which again was a time of fasting before the Reformation. So not much food going on, not like these days where we stuff ourselves even before. But Christmas, especially New Year's Day and 12th night, everybody was eating really, really well. It was preserved food, yes. If you could afford it, you had fresh meat. The price of chickens went up. What has changed, and you see people complaining that fresh chickens all of a sudden sell for so much more before Christmas, and after Christmas it plunges again. Yeah. And some of the wealthy Tudors would have kept a warren with rabbits. In Tudor England, rabbits, not hares, but rabbits, were considered very upmarket, and they protected their warrens very well. The rabbits were introduced by the Normans, so quite some time earlier, but they didn't take to the English climate very well, which is strange when you now look and there's rabbits everywhere. But they took a few hundred years, and by Tudor times they were still very much in demand, being rare. And yes, you obviously, if you were rich, Christmas was the time where you would get all your banqueting food out again, your sugar. And it's amazing to think that in Henry VIII's time, sugary treats would have been rare because sugar was so rare, even in Henry's time, that even the wealthy wouldn't have had that much, not enough to preserve fruit. Let's put it that way. Um, where in Elizabethan times, when you study the recipe books, you all of a sudden have not hundreds, but tens of recipes all about how to preserve fruit from the summer to have it ready for Christmas. So for them, a strawberry jam or a strawberry tart would have been just out of this world for the first time ever. Wow, we can eat strawberries at Christmas. We take it for granted. The Tudors still knew how to respect food in the seasons.
It's wonderful. And it's really exciting to think about just the way things change, and something that we might just pick up or walk by at one of our many parties before Christmas would have been a Christmas or 12th night treat, a strawberry tart that was, excuse me, the biggest thing you've seen. All right. Well, so you've taken us through the year or the seasons eating with the Tudors. And I want to thank Brigita so much for joining us, and let everybody know that the book is available. It has sold out a couple of times, but it's back in stock. And you can also get it right from Brigita on her website. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it at Blackwell's. You can get it all kinds of places, including the National Archives bookstore, right, Brigita?
Yeah, that was a surprise, but yes, it was a pleasant one.
A wonderful surprise. So it's in all kinds of places, as it should be. And I'm so excited about that. I was so happy when you put that up. So thank you so much for joining us and just taking us through what it was like to eat with the Tudors. And thank you for all of your work. You know, it's so interesting the places you have found these tidbits in the household accounts or in someone's letter where they mention something. So much research has gone into this. And every recipe, if you don't know, every recipe has these beautiful photos so you can see as well, and a history of the recipe. It's just so much fun. So thank you so much, Brigita, for being with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this fun journey through Tudor food with the Tudor expert, Brigitte Webster. So thank you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Royals, Rebels, and Romantics. I hope to hear from you soon, and I hope you'll join us again as we keep shaking up history together. Thank you.